Hello everybody, how are we all doing? It is Trevon from Free Studio Time 101 here, and today I'm going to be talking about presence and giving you a few different types of techniques that I use in order to get my mix and master present. So first off, I wanted to talk about what presence actually is. Presence pretty much just means you're finding clarity for a specific thing within your mix. In this specific video, we're going to be talking about getting more present vocals. Now, when it comes to mixing and mastering, as you go throughout your vocal chain on the mix and then you go into the master, you're going to notice that there's a few different types of things that may interfere with the presence inside of your vocals. So that's why it's best to make sure you know exactly what you're doing so you don't really have to worry about any of that. But if you're in a situation where you don't really know what to do and your vocals have just been sounding super muddy, you don't have any clue why, I'm about to give you pretty much all the sauce, right? Now, this is another one of those really important things that you need in order to get your vocals to sound professional. Not even just your vocals, but your mix and master to sound professional, because if the mix doesn't sound present enough and it sounds muddy, the whole song is ruined. Nobody's gonna want to listen to your song if you have a muddy sounding vocal. So that's why presence is super duper important, and I cannot stress it enough. So let's go hop into FL Studio. I'm gonna show you a few different tricks that I like to use, and we can have a little bit of fun.
So let's talk about how we can achieve presence in our mix and master. First, I'm gonna play you this song, show you how everything sounds like. It's a pretty nice example of a nice and present mix, like vocals that are like sitting right in front of your face. So let's get straight into it.
You just stay looking right, I'll just stay being around. Cause we both know you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the dollar bill. But I know you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the dollar bill. Oh no, I'm not gonna be here, let's try to catch a cup for. You just stay being tight, I'll just stay being around. Cause we both know you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the dollar bill. Be here, be here, be here, be here, be here, be here, be here.
So presence, let's talk about how I achieved that presence inside of this mix. So first things first, EQ. If you've been watching this channel for a minute, you know I always like to use two EQs, one in the very beginning and one after my compression. So when using these EQs, you have to be very aware of what you're going to be affecting according to the order that you have the EQ placed inside of the vocal bus, right? So this EQ right here is pretty much just balancing out the frequencies of my raw unprocessed vocals, right? This is the very first thing to actually touch my raw vocals. This is the very first thing inside of that chain of vocal processing. So with that being said, you have to be aware of what you should be listening for from your raw vocals. So if I was to turn all of these effects off and just play this first EQ, I noticed that presence wasn't that big of an issue, but it was like with the more plugins I added onto the vocal bus, the more apparent that problem was becoming. But anyways, as far as like what I did for presence on this EQ for the first one, is just add a nice high shelf filter to the high end. And I kind of think of the high end crispiness and those presence frequencies right here, I kind of think of these as going hand in hand, because once you boost up those frequencies and you don't have that crispiness from your high end, the presence just won't sound good at all. So that's why it's good to make sure that your high end is in check before you even start to be worried about presence. And honestly, just like go and adjust both of these frequencies at the same time accordingly, because if you get these two right, this is what's really gonna make your vocals sound nice, clean, and balanced. So yeah, that's all I did for the first EQ. Let's go over to the second EQ, because this is where I really put in the work at, right? The first EQ is just like a foundational EQ to handle and process the frequencies of those raw vocals. So now I've done a little bit of compression, balancing out the dynamics. I've took care of that sibilance that I may be experiencing for my vocals. Now I can come over and add my EQ and get a nice balanced sound from the frequencies in my mix. So first things first, you see that I didn't even touch my high end right here. I touched it by like a very little bit. Like how much did I boost it up by? Like literally like 0.2 dB, and that's legit just it. Main thing to look at right here is this. So I boosted up this 4,440 hertz frequency, because I noticed that when I boosted this frequency up, I noticed that I was getting the most clear sound for my vocals out of this 440 hertz frequency, 4,440 hertz frequency, I mean. So what I actually did in order to come to this conclusion right here was turn on the beat first. And once I turned on the beat, I just kept slowly, gradually boosting up this specific frequency until it sounded like my vocals were nice, clear, and crisp. And that's how I got to 3.2 dB of gain for this 4,440 hertz frequency. And this is like the main thing that's going to be giving me that presence within my vocals, because if I didn't have this, just this one little hump right here, my vocals wouldn't be able to sound anywhere near as crisp as I wanted them to. So there's a few different factors to getting me to get that sound, but this is like the main one right here. And on top of that, on both of these EQs, I added soft saturation. So just like a nice little bit of harmonic distortion added to these EQs to just enhance what I already have right now from these frequencies. And last thing that I want to mention is that I didn't add EQ hump right here for the high end or like a high shelf filter, because on the first EQ I already added one, so I pretty much had all the high end I need. And once you start to add too much high end, like if I was to add just this little boost right here on the high shelf for the second EQ, I'll be getting a little bit too much high end, and that's where a lot of harshness will start to come from. So it's best to just make sure you're being very cognizant of what you're doing with that high end. And I should also make you aware that sometimes you may need to cut the high end a little bit in order to get that sound that you need, and sometimes you won't really have to mess with it at all. It really just depends on what your song sounds like or the type of sound that you want to get from your song, right? So second thing is my verb. I'm using the whole side chaining method for my reverb. I'm using two reverbs as well, but I want you to pay special attention to this specific reverb right here. This is the first one I have on the whole reverb side chaining track. So when using two reverbs in tandem, it's nice to have one brighter, shorter sounding reverb that really just complements the overall feel of your vocals. This is my brighter reverb. If you've never used this before, this will kind of look like rocket science to you. So let me just go ahead and give you like a basic foundation of what's going on here. So right here, reflections. This really just controls how much feedback you're getting from your actual reverb. Plate is more of like a medium-sized reverb. This is where the bulk of your vocal information is going to be coming from inside of the reverb, right? And last is your hall, or I have it in chamber mode right now, but your hall pretty much controls how wide the reverb is going to sound or how long it's going to sound. Now you can choose through a few different options as far as like tonality and just like feel that you get from your reverbs, depending on what type of setting you're in, whether you're in plate or you're in chamber or you're in hall right there. But the main idea of this whole reverb was to make it sound a bit brighter. Right here, this little knob right here allows me to slide between all these different types of reverbs over here in order to get a sound that I really like. So as you can see, it's just pretty much dead center in the middle. So after me setting this dead center in the middle and turning this onto hall, because I remember I wanted a more shorter sounding reverb, and this is a large chamber for my hall. I set my hall to large chamber mode, meaning that my hall will be a little bit more isolated, which will overall cause my actual reverb to sound a little bit more boxed in, which is exactly what I need from this specific reverb. And I come in and I add a little bit more longer type sounding reverb in my second reverb over here. So yeah, but anyways, the way I got this one to sound even more bright was by coming over here and giving it a nice EQ boost to my high end. And after I finished with that reverb right there, what I did was I came over here to this EQ. I added an EQ because when working with two EQs, you have places to control your EQ from inside of the reverb, at least with inside of Neoverb, but there's still a few things that sound a little bit out of whack, mainly just because you're not controlling everything at once and you're controlling these two reverbs separately. Now you only need to do this, of course, when you're using two reverbs, but when you're using two reverbs, it's really hard to kind of get that EQ right when you're going for different sounds from each specific reverb. So that's why I like to come and finish my reverb sidechain off with a nice EQ in order to get those sounds that I really wanted out of it. Now in this reverb EQ, I just added a nice EQ boost to the lower mid-range area, this 500 frequency hertz range, mainly just because this is gonna make my reverb sound a bit fuller, which will in turn complement the overall sound I'm getting from my vocals. Now, last thing I did was come over here and I cut my high end by about 0.9 dB. Cut it off by 0.9 dB because just like how I said earlier, it's really hard to get that sound under control that you're getting from your reverbs just working from the reverb EQ inside of each of these right here. So that's why I had to come over here and I had to cut the high end out by a very little bit because it was still a little bit too much high end I was getting from those reverbs, and I wanted to make sure I was getting that under control and I wasn't getting any type of harsh frequencies from those reverbs. And that really contributed a lot to the presence of my actual vocals, because that's something that's going to make the presence stand out. Really making sure that you have a nice hold on your reverb will really contribute to that sound you're getting from the presence frequencies in your vocals. So yeah, now last thing I did was come over here to Soothe 2 and I boosted up this band a little bit right where those presence frequencies are. Where am I at? I'm at about 4900 hertz. I boosted this up right here, and I know I say this all the time, but for the people that don't really know what Soothe 2 is, this is a dynamic resonance suppressor. So it's pretty much finding resonance within inside of your audio waves and it's suppressing that resonance down, kind of similar to a compressor, but there's not really too much gain reduction involved. So that's why Soothe 2 is really cool for something like this. But in this specific case, I wanted to use Soothe 2 right here for the specific frequency to get any type of weird sounds from the presence frequencies that I boosted up earlier. I wanted to get all those weird kind of muffly sounds taken care of so I can get those frequencies to sound as clear as they possibly can, because it'll be a shame if you were to boost up these frequencies right here inside of your EQ. It'd be a real shame if you were to boost up those frequencies and then you start to get a whole bunch of harshness and you start to get a bunch of crazy weird sounding sounds that make your song sound bad, right? So that's why it's always nice to come over and add a nice EQ. But that's pretty much it as far as getting your vocals to sound more present. It's not really as hard as it may seem to be. So one last thing I say you need to watch out for when trying to achieve presence within your mixes is making sure that you have your low mid-range frequencies under control and your mid-range frequencies. Now, the main reason I say this is because within your low mid-range frequencies, these are where a lot of those boxy kind of like fuller sounds from your vocals are going to be coming from. So when thinking about the sounds that you want overall from your vocals, you don't want any type of boxy sounds. And once you start to use your EQ and you notice that you have a lot of boxy sounds, you notice that those boxy sounds are actually going to be competing with those present sounds, and is what's really going to cause your mix to sound very weird and overall cause your mix to sound in the back of a room or just sound really weird and muddy. So it's best to make sure you get these muddy frequencies under control too. On my first foundational EQ that takes care of those raw vocals we were talking about earlier, I had to come over here and I had to take out this 440 hertz frequency by about 4 dB. And that's because if I'm already dealing with this problem from the jump before I even put any types of effects on my vocals, I might as well just go ahead and nip it in the bud right then and there. So that's why this is like one of the first things that I did was come over here and I took this 440 hertz frequency out, as well as this one right here, just because I was kind of getting a tad bit of harshness from my low mid range as well. So I had to come over and I had to take this out by a very little bit. But anyways, once I finished with that, I just came over to my second EQ. After all of my compression, I just came over to my second EQ and I did just a very little bit of tidy work within my low end. As you see, I didn't really have to take out too much right here just because I already took care of the majority in the first EQ. I did a little bit of tweaking around. I was getting a tad bit of weird sounds coming from the lower portion of my low mid, so I took that out by 1.5 dB. And again, this frequency right here, after my compression, a little bit of these frequencies started to become a little bit more amplified, so I had to once again nip this in the bud, but not as anywhere near as much as I did before with that 4 dB. I just took it out by another 1.5 dB right here for this 440 hertz frequency range. Then lastly, right here, the 678 frequency, it was pretty much the same situation as before. Like right here in this specific EQ for the first one, I had to dip this one out by a very little bit. And of course, after you compress and your vocals get amplified by a very little bit, a lot more of these frequencies start to become a little bit more apparent. So I had to do the same thing. I just had to come by and I had to take it out by a very little bit. But just notice I didn't have to take these frequencies out as much as I did in the first one, because they're already taken care of. You know, if those frequencies are already taken care of, once you start to make too big of adjustments, that's where you start to get a lot of funky, crazy sounds. But all right, everyone, that is pretty much how I achieve presence within my mix and master. I'm gonna give you one last listen to how everything sounds to give you an idea of what a present mix and master should sound like from your mixing and mastering. So let's get straight into it.
You just stay looking right, I'ma stay being wrong. Cause we both know you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the dollar bill. But I know you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the dollar bill. Oh no, I'm not gonna be here when it's trying to catch a cup full. You just stay being tight, I'ma stay being wrong. Cause we both know you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the dollar bill. Be here, be here, be here, be here. You been feeling, I been feeling, I been letting it get. Now we staring in the ceiling, can't hide the kite. Baby, come get it, I'm alright.
But that is how you achieve presence within your mix and master, everyone.
Recording artists and audio engineers, or aspiring audio engineers, I'm talking directly to you right now. I have an opportunity for you, because I know you're probably struggling searching on YouTube to find all the right answers in order to get your mix and master to sound pro. And I'm gonna tell you right now, it's gonna take a really long time in order for that to happen. I mean, it's definitely not impossible to reach that pro level just using YouTube and the different types of resources off of the internet, but I'm telling you, it's just going to take absolutely forever. That's why I want to actually help you. I want to help you get to a pro level in a short amount of time, so you don't have to go through all the things that I had to go through in order to get my sound to sound the way I wanted it to. Now, if that sounds like something you're interested in, what I want you to do is actually hit the link in the description so I can tell you more about how I can help you develop your personal sound into what you really want it to be. I'm always super excited to help those who really need it, so make sure you hit the link in the description. But all right, everyone, I hope you got a lot of value out of this video. If you did, make sure to hit like, make sure to hit subscribe. I'll catch you all in the next one.